Now, among the fighters defending Ukraine are a number of Russian dissidents who were forced to leave their homeland. They include Ilya Ponomarev. He was the only member of the Russian parliament who voted against the annexation of Crimea in 2014. He now lives in the capital, Kyiv, where he has joined the defence forces. I spoke to Ilya Ponomarev earlier, and I asked him what made him take up arms against Russia, the country that he once represented in parliament.
I'm not fighting against the country. I'm fighting against Putin and Putinism and modern-day Russian fascism. I'm really sorry, I'm disgusted, and I'm ashamed that fascism was born in the country which once defeated the fascism. And I think that it needs to be defeated and that fascism has no nationality. And I remember quite well when many Germans were joining the ranks of anti-fascists and fighting within anti-Hitler coalition with different other nations, and they were not ashamed of this at all.
Now, the Kremlin, we can presume, can't be happy about the path that you've chosen to take. Are you worried about your own safety?
Obviously, we are at war, and nobody is safe when he is at war. But I made this decision in 2014, and I moved fully to Ukraine in 2016. And when I was making this decision, obviously, I was making the decision that I am coming to the country at war. And quite a lot of my friends have perished during this period of time. Many of their names are well known internationally. Some of their names are totally unknown. But unfortunately, it was not uncommon to die fighting with Putin.
The Russian president has threatened lightning-fast retaliation against any Western countries that intervene on Ukraine's behalf. How serious would you say are such threats?
Putin is a mobster. That's why he is threatening everyone. And only weak people should follow the advice of a mobster. And I hope that Germany would not. Putin wants the world to believe that he is a crazy man. That's why he's talking about nukes. But if you would look at his personal safety, how well he is taking care of it, look at these lengthy tables, how he's meeting international leaders, you would understand that he doesn't want to die. He is not a suicide man. So I think that all those threats are very empty threats, and he just hopes that world leaders are weak.
The Russian army has claimed significant territorial gains in the past few days, especially in southern Ukraine. In your opinion, is the Ukrainian army well enough equipped to withstand Russian troops?
I wouldn't say that their advances in the last days were so significant as you just now suggested. They are advancing in one areas, they are retreating in other areas, like they do next to Izium or next to Kharkiv. So it's the war situation. It's bad, but it's normal. And I think that Ukrainians, in terms of fighting the invaders, are equipped well enough, and they're very committed, they're energized, and the morale in the military is very high. The biggest problem that Ukrainian military has is the problem with the counteroffensives. Because to do that, you need to control the skies, you need to have heavy equipment, and this is what Ukrainian army lacks, and that's what we hope that the international community can help the country with.
If we can go back to some of the decisions being made about this war by President Putin, you know Russian politics. Would you say that Putin himself is making every decision in this war? And do you believe that he is being told the full truth by his advisors?
In terms of international policies, that was always the domain for Vladimir Putin exclusively. And he did not tolerate anyone interfering with his decisions. Within the country, no, he is not a unilateral dictator who makes all the decisions just by himself. He takes advice, and it's a certain group of people, his Politburo, if you will, with which he consults when he is making principal decisions. But obviously, the strategic decisions are on him. And when he was making the decision on Ukraine, obviously here you're absolutely right. He took the wrong advice, and it was very bad advice. I think that the actual root of the problem is that he was sitting for such a long time in his shelter during the COVID pandemic, so that he lost significant touch with reality. He, we shouldn't deny this. Vladimir Putin is a brilliant psychologist, so he reads the body language of people who is coming to him, and even if they are reporting one thing, but their reality is different, he can read them. But when it's all online, when it's Zoom communications, when it's just paper reports, obviously he cannot do this, and then he has to take the information by its face value, and the result is what we see right now in Ukraine.
And that was Ilya Ponomarev, a former member of the Russian parliament who now lives in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, where he's joined the territorial defence forces. Now we're going to take a look at a couple of other developments related to the war in Ukraine. The UN Refugee Agency says nearly 5.4 million Ukrainians have fled their homeland. While the outflow has slowed significantly, the organisation estimates that more than 8 million will have left by the end of this year. Germany's parliament has voted to supply more arms to Ukraine, including heavy weapons. The governing coalition and opposition Conservatives agreed to step up deliveries. Chancellor Olaf Scholz previously held back on sending heavy weapons to avoid provoking a conflict with Russia. And US President Joe Biden is sending a request to Congress to approve an additional $33 billion in aid for Ukraine. The package includes $20 billion in military assistance to keep Ukraine supplied with weapons and ammunition. Biden said the funds signal a long-term US commitment to Ukraine and that it was critical Congress approved the aid quickly.
This so-called supplemental funding addresses the needs of the Ukrainian military during the critical weeks and months ahead. And it begins the transition to longer-term security assistance that's going to help Ukraine deter and continue to defend against Russian aggression. This assistance would provide even more artillery, armored vehicles, anti-armored systems, anti-air capabilities that have been used so effectively thus far in the battlefield by the Ukrainian warriors. And it's going to deliver much-needed humanitarian assistance as well as food, water, medicine, shelter, and other aid to Ukrainians displaced by Russia's war.
OK, let's go straight to our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Sumi Somaskanda. Sumi, give us your assessment of what we just heard from President Biden there.
Anya, this is pretty significant. Another announcement for a lot of support for Ukraine. President Biden, as we heard there, is issuing what's called a supplemental budget request of $33 billion. That's for military, economic and humanitarian assistance. And that is intended to, according to reports here, be sufficient to last through October, so the next 5 months or so. And President Biden addressed the fact that he had exhausted all of the resources that Congress had made available to him. He said, essentially, we are out of money. And remember, if we look at the military aid here, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was in Germany earlier this week speaking with allies about what Ukraine needs. And just before that, he met with the Ukrainian President Zelensky in Kyiv. So some of the weapons, the military aid included in this package, likely came directly from those meetings, what was requested there. As for the humanitarian aid, President Biden said this is in part to address the global food insecurity that we're seeing. We know that Ukraine provides an important amount of the world's wheat and cannot continue to produce that due to the fighting. And one more point on what he said. He also said, we're not attacking Russia. We are helping Ukraine defend itself. And Anya, that to me appears to be a response to President Putin of Russia issuing that threat to countries helping Ukraine, that there would be this lightning quick response. So President Biden there again underlining what exactly the U.S. intends to do. OK. And yet $33 billion is an awful lot of money, obviously, for arming, supporting Ukraine, as you say. Is there political unity in Washington about this package? Definitely. This is very likely to get approval in Congress. There is a lot of bipartisan support for standing behind Ukraine. There was overwhelming support in approving the last aid package that came through Congress. That was a $13.6 billion approved last month. Yes, it is a lot of money, but President Biden said this is a small price to pay to defend Ukraine. And that is something we keep hearing from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle here. They believe that this could stretch on weeks and months. There's an understanding that this could grind into a long, protracted battle, especially as it moves to the east and the south of the country, and that Ukraine will continue to need these weapons. So yes, there is a lot of support.
I also want to ask you what Biden said about Russian oligarchs. He said he wants to tighten the legal grip on oligarchs as they try to hide their property. Is that likely to pass Congress?
That is, Anya, and this is an interesting proposal from the White House. They want to seize assets from Russian oligarchs to compensate Ukraine. And we heard President Biden say this is about targeting kleptocrats and, as he said, their ill-begotten gains. What that means, well, the White House Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, tweeted out earlier today, I saw he tweeted, seize yachts, fund the war. And that is not an exaggeration. We know that in early April, the U.S. seized a Russian-owned luxury yacht in Mallorca that belonged to a Russian oligarch. The idea here is to take some of those assets that have been seized on grounds of violating sanctions or money laundering, for example, and to liquidate them and to sell them, essentially, and use that to fund Ukraine's effort to defend itself. And this is really about putting the squeeze on those people who are close to President Vladimir Putin, and the hope that that pressure will get President Putin to start moving, not to mention the sanctions that are already on the Russian economy on a whole. So if you look at what the U.S. has spent so far and continues to want to spend on Ukraine, these assets, once liquidated, could add up to a not insignificant amount, Anya.
Sumi, thanks so much. Sumi Somaskanda in Washington.